isn't today the anniversary of your marriage with Dad? I've got something for you, Chloe said, her voice biting as she handed me the envelope. I could see the disdain in her eyes. I took the envelope, my heart heavy but steady. I opened it and saw the neatly arranged divorce papers, Tony's signature glaring back at me. You're really sure about this? What goes around comes around, I warned, locking eyes with my daughter and making sure my voice didn't waver. She shrugged, her indifference stinging more than any words could. It's for the best, she replied. Tony stood behind her, his arms crossed and a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. His once charming artist demeanor had devolved into something much darker over the years, something that made me question the man I'd fallen for more than 2 decades ago. 25 years, I muttered, shaking my head. What happened to for better or worse? Tony didn't flinch. Things change, Caroline. People change. I held up the papers, my fingers gripping the edges. These cost more than just good times. They cost trust, respect, and the life we built. You really want to dismantle all that for this? Chloe leaned against the doorframe, twirling a strand of her perfectly styled hair. Dad deserves happiness, too. At my expense? I shot back. I felt a rising anger that tasted of betrayal. Don't think I've been ignorant of your little escapades. Tony's eyes flickered, but Chloe interrupted before he could respond. If you can't handle this, maybe you never really knew us. I stepped closer, my gaze drilling into Tony's. Where does this leave you? Running off with Raquel and starting fresh? Don't forget where the roof over your head comes from. You should have thought about that while you buried yourself in work, Tony spat. I laughed bitterly. Someone had to pay the bills when your art wasn't exactly selling off the shelves. Chloe's expression hardened. Honestly, Mom, get over it. Sign the papers and stop being so dramatic. I folded the papers carefully, putting them back into the envelope. This isn't over, I said, voice steady now. It's far from over. I turned around, leaving them in the living room, their victory short-lived. As soon as I was out of sight, I let myself breathe. Years of dedication and sacrifice narrowed down to this moment felt like a bad joke. But if they thought I'd roll over so easily, they were wrong. I heard Tony's voice, low and mocking. She'll sign them. She always follows the rules. Chloe responded, Yeah, let her have her moment. We'll carry on just fine without her. As I climbed the stairs, I made a mental note to call Detective Parker. It was time to put my plans in motion. They may have delivered the first blow, but I was prepared for war. This family facade had crumbled, but I wasn't going down with it. What goes around truly does come around, and I was about to make sure they learned that the hard way. Years ago, I had met Tony at a gallery opening in Soho. I was young, ambitious, fresh out of law school, and he was the magnetic center of the room, an artist with dreams larger than his means. He had charmed me instantly. The way he talked about his paintings, his visions, it was intoxicating. We married quickly and passionately. The first few years were full of laughter and love. Even when we struggled financially, I never doubted our bond. Tony would paint all day while I climbed the legal ladder, working grueling hours to support both our dreams. When Chloe was born, I hoped she would complete our little family. Caroline, we've got a good thing, Tony used to say, pulling me into a kiss as Chloe played inside her crib. Just you watch, my big break is coming. But that break never came. Instead, I found myself taking on more cases, working longer hours. Tony's optimism turned into frustration, and his frustration often exploded into arguments about money, time, and priorities. I need to make something of myself, he'd insist while staring at a half-finished canvas. I can't be stuck at home all day. And I can't keep carrying this family alone, I'd retort, the exhaustion heavy in my voice. As Chloe grew, she seemed to inherit Tony's sense of entitlement without a lick of his artistic ambition. By the time she was a teenager, she demanded the kind of lifestyle we simply couldn't afford. Shopping sprees, fancy gadgets, luxury vacations, each request felt like another nail in the coffin of my overburdened bank account. Mom, everyone's going to Paris for spring break. I can't be the only one not going. Chloe whined one evening. Chloe, we can't afford it, I replied firmly. Maybe next year. You always say that, she snapped before slamming her bedroom door. Tony, instead of backing me up, would often undermine my efforts. Just let her go, Caroline. We can figure something out. Figure out what, Tony? How to stretch an already overdrawn bank account. I'd shoot back. Then there were the credit card statements. At first, they were minor, easily overlooked, a meal here, a shopping trip there. But then, the charges started mounting. Expensive dinners, lodging at upscale hotels, all under Tony's name. One evening, I couldn't take it any longer. Tony, we need to talk about these charges on the credit card. He barely looked up from his canvas. So talk. What's Raquel's boutique, and why are there $1,000 charges there? He finally turned to me, irritation flashing in his eyes. I bought some things for Chloe. Why do you care so much? You've got the money. I care because it's reckless. We can barely make ends meet as it is. Tony threw down his paintbrush, splattering red paint everywhere. God, Caroline, you're such a buzzkill. Maybe if you weren't always working, you'd understand. It's my work that keeps this family afloat, Tony. The conversation ended with silence and a tense standoff. From there, things only got worse. The distances between us grew, not just financially but emotionally. Tony and Chloe became closer, a clique of their own, leaving me to hold together the fragments of what was once a loving household. Looking back, it's clear now. The seeds of betrayal were planted long ago, watered by my hard work and Tony's dissatisfaction. But little did they know, I had begun preparing for the storm they were brewing. The demands of my job were relentless. I spent most days in the office and nights poring over case files at home. The firm required as much of my time as they could get, and I willingly gave it, thinking it would secure our future. But each hour at work meant another hour away from a home that was slowly falling apart. One evening, I stumbled upon another credit card statement riddled with lavish expenses. Chloe, I yelled, holding the paper up as she walked into the kitchen. She barely glanced at me, busy texting on her phone. What? Care to explain this bill? You spent $2,000 at some designer store last week. She rolled her eyes. Relax, Mom. It's just some clothes. $2,000 on clothes, Chloe? Really? Tony walked in, sensing the tension. What's going on? I waved the statement at him. Have you seen this? Chloe's spending is out of control. Tony took the paper, looked at it briefly, and shrugged. She's a teenager, Caroline. Let her enjoy her life. This isn't just enjoying life, Tony. This is irresponsible. Chloe scoffed. You just love playing the martyr, don't you, Mom? Always acting like you're the only one who matters. It's called responsibility, Chloe. Something you'd know nothing about, I retorted, my patience wearing thin. Tony flung the paper onto the counter. If it bothers you so much, why didn't you just come to me? We could sort it out together. Oh, like you've been so helpful, I replied sarcastically. Maybe if you spent less time indulging her and more time supporting the family, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Maybe if you weren't such a control freak, Tony snapped back, we wouldn't feel the need to escape from your rules. It wasn't the first time he'd thrown my dedication to work back in my face, but it stung every time. I'm doing what's necessary to keep this family afloat. Meanwhile, I'm trying to give our daughter the life she deserves, he shouted, cutting me off. Chloe smirked, enjoying the rift her actions had caused. Face it, Mom, you're losing control. I glared at both of them, feeling the divide grow wider by the second. I turned and walked away, needing to clear my head. I pulled my phone out, dialing Detective Parker's number. It was time to find out just how deep Tony's betrayal went. The next few weeks were a blur of work and covert meetings with Parker. The detective was thorough, handing over photos, receipts, and logs detailing Tony's outings with Raquel. The evidence was enough to make my blood boil. During one of our sessions, Parker handed me a thick file. This includes everything, Mrs. Smith. Photos, transaction records, even witness statements. I took the file, feeling its weight. Thank you, Parker. This will be very useful. Returning home, I found Tony and Chloe in the living room, laughing over some show. Their carefree attitudes were like salt in a wound. I watched them from the doorway, the file clenched in my hand. The betrayal seemed even more grotesque when masked by their masquerade of normalcy. For now, I'd play along, letting their complacency be my advantage. But the time was fast approaching when I'd lay my cards on the table. They thought they could walk all over me without consequence. They were about to find out how wrong they were. Months passed, filled with uneasy tension and feigned normalcy. At work, I was my usual self, efficient, focused, a pillar of strength. At home, however, I moved like a ghost, observing but detached, preparing for the storm I knew was coming. One night, while Tony and Chloe were out, I met Detective Parker at a quiet cafe. He laid out an envelope filled with new evidence. "You might want to brace yourself for this," he warned. Inside were photos of Tony with Raquel, not just at luxury spots but with Chloe accompanying them. Shopping sprees, dinners, even vacations. My money funding their escapades. How could he involve Chloe in all of this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the betrayal cutting deeper with each new revelation. "He's using her to shield the affair," Parker said, shaking his head. "By making her complicit, he's trying to justify his actions. But don't worry, Mrs. Smith, we have everything we need to expose him." I nodded, determination hardening my resolve. "Good, let's proceed." Returning home, I found Tony alone, pouring himself a drink. He looked up, surprise flashing in his eyes for a moment before settling into indifference. "What are you doing home so early?" "Just wrapping things up at work," I replied, my voice steady. "Where's Chloe?" "Out with friends," he said dismissively. I nodded, moving to sit across from him. "Tony, we need to talk." He took a sip of his drink, studying me. "About what?" "About us. About where this is heading," he laughed bitterly. "Do we have to do this now, Caroline?" "Yes," I insisted, my eyes locked onto his. "I want to know why. Why her? Why involve Chloe?" He sighed, setting his glass down. "You left me no choice. You were always working, always absent. I needed something more. And you thought you'd find that by betraying me? By turning our daughter against me?" My voice rose, unable to contain the flood of emotions any longer. "You act like you're a saint," he spat. "But you're cold, distant. You never cared about what I wanted, about what Chloe needed." Anger surged within me. "I cared enough to work myself to the bone to give you both a good life. I cared enough to overlook your shortcomings, to support your dreams even when they drained our resources. And this is how you repay me?" "Repay? You always made it clear it was your money, your success," he countered. "There was never any us in your world, Caroline." I shook my head, feeling the weight of his words but refusing to let them break me. "You think you're the victim here? You think dragging Chloe into your mess absolves you?" He stood up, swaying ever so slightly. "Think what you want, Caroline, but you're not blameless in this mess." "You're right," I said quietly, standing up to match his height. "I am to blame, for trusting you, for believing in you, but that ends now." I turned and walked away, leaving him to his self-pity. Upstairs, I locked myself in my room, the sounds of Tony's ranting a distant echo. I pulled out the evidence provided by Parker, spreading it across my desk. This was just the beginning. Tony and Chloe had made me feel small, insignificant, but they underestimated my resolve. They thought they could manipulate and discard me. They were gravely mistaken. The confrontation was coming, and I was ready. Retribution would be swift and thorough. Everything that went around was about to come crashing back down on them. This war was far from over, and I was prepared to fight tooth and nail for every inch of my dignity and justice. I spent the next several weeks quietly gathering my evidence, preparing myself for the battle ahead. The house, once a place of warmth, now felt like enemy territory. Tony and Chloe carried on with their lives, oblivious to the storm brewing right under their noses. One evening, Tony came home late, his steps unsteady. "Hey, Caroline," he slurred, trying to act normal. "Where's dinner?" I glanced up from my paperwork, keeping my composure. "There's some leftovers in the fridge." He stumbled to the kitchen, muttering under his breath. "Whatever. I'm not hungry anyway." Chloe barged in shortly after. "Mom, I need some money. My friends and I are going out this weekend." I stared at her, the nerve of her request adding fuel to my simmering anger. "No, not this time, Chloe." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Ah, you're so unfair. Dad would give it to me." "Well, your dad can't keep spending what we don't have," I shot back. Tony re-entered the room, his expression dark. "What's this about, Caroline? Chloe wants more money for her latest outing, and I'm saying no. Can't you cut her some slack? She's young, let her have fun." "Fun? Our financial situation is anything but fun, Tony. We need to be responsible." Tony scoffed. "Of course you'd say that. Always the buzzkill." Chloe jumped in. "Why are you even bringing this up now? We were fine before." "Before what, Chloe?" I demanded. "Before you started using me as your personal ATM? Before you and your father decided to make a mockery of this family?" Tony shook his head, chuckling bitterly. Look at yourself, Caroline. You're so obsessed with control, you're suffocating us. Suffocating? I stood up, my voice rising with each word. You think trying to keep this family financially afloat is suffocating, while you squander everything on your own selfish desires? Chloe narrowed her eyes at me. This is your fault, you know. If you weren't so busy trying to be perfect at work, maybe you'd notice what's going on at home. I laughed, but it was humorless and cold. Oh, I've noticed plenty, more than you both realize. Tony glared at me, sensing the shift. What are you talking about? I reached for the file on the desk, pulling out the thick stack of evidence Parker had gathered. You think running around with Raquel, using Chloe as your cover, went unnoticed? You think I didn't see through your lies and betrayal? Both their faces dropped. Neither had expected me to confront them so directly. Tony's composure cracked first. You had me followed? I had to. You left me no choice, I replied, throwing the file onto the table. These are just the highlights of your indiscretions. Receipts, photos, witness statements. It's all here. Chloe, for once, was silent, her bravado evaporating. Tony, however, looked furious. How dare you? No, Tony, how dare you? How dare you betray me and think you'd get away with it? The tension in the room was palpable, each word slicing through the facade they had maintained for so long. Get out of my sight, both of you, I demanded, voice breaking with emotion. I don't want to see either of you right now. Tony and Chloe left, their outrage mixed with fear. They had underestimated me, and now they knew it. I returned to my preparations, knowing the time for retribution was near. They thought they were clever, that they could keep me in the dark and manipulate everything to their advantage. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. This battle was mine to win, and I was ready for every strike they could muster. I woke up on the morning of our anniversary with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Today was the day I would confront Tony and Chloe head-on what should have been a celebration of our union, but had turned into a bitter reminder of deceit. I found them in the kitchen, already aligned like a united front. Tony looked up from his coffee, a smug expression crossing his face. Morning, Caroline. Morning, I replied tersely, my gaze icy. Chloe joined him at the table, a knowing smirk on her face. Happy anniversary, Mom. Happy indeed, I said, pulling out a carefully prepared folder from my bag. Let's get right to it, shall we? Tony eyed the folder warily. What's that? Proof of your betrayal, I said, throwing the folder on the table. Everything you did behind my back. The affair, the extravagant spending, using Chloe as a cover. Chloe's smirk vanished. What? Read it and weep, I snapped, pointing at the folder. Tony opened it, flipping through the damning pages. His face changed from confusion to anger. You hired a PI? I did what I had to. This marriage, this family was hanging by a thread, and you were too busy indulging yourself to care. Chloe grabbed the folder and started skimming through the documents. You spied on us? On your own family? This so-called family betrayed me, I shot back. You think you can play games with me and get away with it? Tony slammed the folder shut. You always have to control everything. I had to control everything because you let everything fall apart, I shouted, my voice echoing in the kitchen. Us, it's over, Tony. His face twisted in rage. Don't think you can just walk away from this. I can and I will, I said steadily. But not without taking what's mine. He laughed bitterly. You think you can just take everything? I've already taken steps to protect my assets, I replied coldly. I've set up my own accounts, pulled my investments out of our shared ventures, and contacted a lawyer. You won't be getting a penny more than you're entitled to. Chloe looked horrified. You're tearing this family apart. No, Chloe, I corrected her, my tone dripping with disdain. You and your father tore this family apart the moment you decided his affair was more important than our unity. Tony's face turned red. This isn't over, Caroline. We'll fight you on this. Good luck with that, I said, my voice like steel. Every move from now on will be scrutinized. Every transaction, every lie, every betrayal. You're going to face consequences for every single one. Tony stormed out of the kitchen, and Chloe followed, her bravado shattered. I was left standing there, feeling a mix of liberation and sadness. This was not how I envisioned our marriage to end, but it was necessary. I walked over to the window, taking a deep breath. The house had become a battleground for lies and deceit, but today marked the beginning of the end. I was stepping out of the shadows of betrayal and into the light of justice. From this point on, Tony and Chloe would know the true meaning of accountability. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight for my dignity, my assets, and my peace. What goes around comes around, and it was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. The days following the confrontation were a whirlwind of legal meetings and packing. I had finally found an apartment downtown, close to the firm. It wasn't much, but it was mine, free from the echoes of betrayal and deceit. Tony was relentless, calling and trying to bargain. "Caroline, we can work this out. Just come home. Let's talk." "No, Tony, we're beyond talking," I replied, my voice unwavering. "This is happening. Accept it." He would swing between anger and desperation. "You'll regret this. You're breaking up our family for what? Revenge?" "Not revenge. Justice. You made your choices. Now live with the consequences." One evening, as I was boxing up my things, Chloe stormed into my office. "You really think you can just walk away and leave us in ruins?" I looked at her, feeling a pang of sorrow mixed with resolve. "I have done everything I could for this family. Your father and you made your choices." "You're so full of yourself," she spat. "You think you're the victim here?" I let out a sigh. "I'm moving out tomorrow, Chloe. I hope one day you understand why." "You'll see, Mom. You'll come crawling back." I shook my head, sadness seeping in. "Goodbye, Chloe." The next morning, I moved my belongings to the new apartment. It was a small one-bedroom place, but it was a fresh start. It felt strange and liberating. Later that day, my lawyer and I filed the divorce papers. I had anticipated Tony's reaction, and soon enough he was at my new place, banging on the door. "Caroline, open up!" he shouted. I opened the door to face him, standing firm. "What do you want, Tony? You think this is the end? You can't just leave like this." "I already have," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "It's over, Tony." "It's not over until I say it's over," he yelled, his rage spilling over. I held up my hand. "This is over the moment you sign those papers. Until then, you're just making it worse for yourself." "You never did care, did you?" he sneered. "All you cared about was your career, your image." I felt my anger rise, but kept my cool. "I cared enough to keep this family going when you abandoned your responsibilities. This is the consequence of your choices, not mine." Tony glared at me one last time before turning and walking away, his threat still hanging in the air. I closed the door, feeling both the sting of the encounter and the relief of its finality. In the following weeks, I focused on reclaiming my life. The legal battle was tough, but with each passing day, I felt stronger. The firm supported me, my colleagues rallied around, and I found solace in my work once more. Tony's desperation turned into petty tactics, but my lawyer was fierce, countering every move he made. Finally, after relentless negotiations and court sessions, the divorce was finalized. I sat in my new living room, sipping wine and looking out at the city. The battle was behind me. The scars were still there, but I had survived. Rebuilding my life piece by piece, I knew the worst was over. Tony and Chloe were left to face the reality they had created. They had thought they could mislead and manipulate me without facing the music. But now, they knew. The house, the pretense, the illusions, all crumbled. I wasn't just free. I was stronger, clearer, and ready for whatever came next. They had underestimated me, and now as the dust settled, they were the ones left to deal with the wreckage. A year later, I could hardly recognize the woman I had become. The bruises from the past had healed, leaving me with a sense of peace and self-assurance I hadn't felt in years. Work was thriving. After the divorce, I threw myself into my career with a newfound vigor. I had taken on high-profile cases, successfully closing deals that put our firm on the map. Colleagues looked to me for advice. My reputation as a top-tier attorney was cemented. My new apartment, though modest, was a sanctuary. Every corner held something that represented my indomitable spirit. Pictures of friends, a few art pieces I bought for myself, and a new rescue dog, Max, who had become my constant companion. One evening, while finishing up a case file, my phone rang. It was Chloe. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" "Mom, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice shaking. "What is it, Chloe?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Things aren't good. He's broke, and Raquel left him. We're losing the house," she confessed, her bravado completely gone. I sighed, the anger I once felt shifting into something softer, but not weak. "Chloe, your father made his choices. You both did. We didn't know it would end up like this, she whispered, her voice cracking. Actions have consequences, I replied. I've spent years cleaning up after your messes. I'm not coming back to do it again. Please, Mom, she pleaded. I'm desperate. I hesitated, the maternal instinct urging me to protect her, but I knew this was a lesson she had to learn. Chloe, you need to figure things out for yourself. I won't always be here to rescue you. There was a long silence on the other end, then a muffled sob. I screwed up, didn't I? Yes, you did, I said softly. But now you have a chance to make it right, to start fresh. Learn from this. The conversation ended, and I felt a strange sense of closure. I had done what I could, but the rest was up to them. Later that night, I took Max for a walk along the river, the cool breeze a reminder of how far I had come. The reflections of city lights danced on the water, a mosaic of possibilities. Returning home, I poured myself a glass of wine, settling into my favorite chair. The legal papers, the hurtful words, the lies, they were all behind me now. I opened a book, reading a few pages before setting it down and closing my eyes. Every choice I had made led me here, to this moment of quiet contentment. I no longer felt the weight of betrayal, but instead, a powerful sense of resilience and clarity. The phone calls from Tony dwindled to nothing. The legal battles finally settled. Chloe's desperate reach out was the last vestige of a past I had severed. They had to navigate the consequences of their actions on their own. As I pet Max, feeling his warm presence grounding me, I knew I had truly moved on. Life had dealt its cards, and I had played mine with strength and integrity. What's more, I had a future to look forward to, a future built on my terms, free from the shackles of deceit and treachery. I smiled, savoring the hard-earned solitude. The world outside kept spinning, but here, in my sanctuary, I was finally at peace. The drama and revenge gave way to the quiet satisfaction of a life reclaimed and a spirit unbroken.